All right. Good morning and welcome, or good afternoon, good evening. I'm not quite sure when you're going to be watching this. Today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And most specifically, I want to use today to talk about fiscal policy. So, the goal today is to make sure that you understand what fiscal policy is and how fiscal policy works, rather than go ahead and record this stuff, or excuse me, cover this stuff in class. We're going to give you a little chance to preview this on your own. Make sure you understand this. Obviously, we want to supplement this stuff in the textbook. So this is module 20, mostly is what we're going to be going through. And then we'll go ahead and try and break up the module 21 into a few groups coming up too. So fiscal policy. We are going to skip through some of this review, but you should very much be able to draw an inflationary gap as well as a recessionary gap. We're not going to ask you to draw that with your fingers here, but what we are looking for you guys to do is to make sure that you're able to go through this. Now, at the very beginning of Module 20, they talk about this concept of Keynesian economics, and we want to make sure we understand this concept. Basically, the big difference we're trying to gather here, and John Maynard Keynes is a super famous economist. You should absolutely know who that is. But the big difference we're talking about in Module 20 is this idea that John Maynard Keynes believed that the government needs to get involved, believed that we can actually impact the economy to try and bring the economy out of things like the Great Depression. Classical economists believe that any kind of government intervention is ultimately wasted because, as we learned when we talked about inflationary and recessionary gaps, in the long run, those things go back to full employment. Keynes said, you know what? We can't wait that long. The economy does self-correct, but it takes too long, and so the government should get involved. We're going to skip those next couple things. All right, you can watch this, read this on your own. It's kind of funny. We're keeping moving. All right, so the basic idea here, when we start thinking about fiscal policy, is the economy is similar to a car. You can drive the car extremely fast if you want. Most cars can go over 100 miles an hour. Don't do it. It's super dangerous, especially with the weather we're having lately. Very dangerous stuff to be driving that quickly. This would be the equivalent, economically speaking, of having extremely low unemployment. You can have extremely low unemployment below natural unemployment, but you can't stay there forever. Whether that be the police are going to pull you over, or in the economy's case, people get tired. People don't have a job for reasons. Sometimes they just don't want to work. At the same time, you can drive extremely slow. Now, it's not very efficient. You can actually drive more quickly than this. This would be the equivalent of the economy sitting at high unemployment. If you think about driving on the highway, 60, 70 miles an hour, pretty sustainable. You get pretty good gas mileage there. That would be the equivalent of full employment. Now, the classical economist is going to say this 70 miles per hour is the way things are going to stay all the time. Ooh, sorry, I'm trying to experiment with my pen here. Some cars have the capacity to drive faster than others, and we want to think about this in terms of third world countries versus industrialized nations. You can start to see that different people can go different places. We've talked about the production possibility curve way back in Unit 1 at the beginning. We can expand our technology, we can expand our productivity, and that will increase our long-run aggregate supply, leaving us with the ability to do even more. Okay, so instead of traveling sustainably at 70 miles an hour, you could imagine with improved technology, improved productivity, you could actually get the car to drive faster, the economy to run better. Okay, Keynesian economics says, fiscal policy says, the government's job is to brake. If we're going too fast, slow the economy down. We don't want to go too fast. It's dangerous. Economically speaking, what that looks like is companies get overvalued, you create a bubble, and then that bubble bursts and people lose a lot of money. And we want to avoid that. At the same time, when things are going bad, right now we're dealing with COVID-19, the economy is starting to dip, unemployment is on the rise. We want to go ahead and help the economy out. And so Joe Biden is proposing this stimulus package to help move things forward. Okay. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is to get some of that going. So fiscal policy is all about how the government is actually going to go ahead and do this. So there's a couple different ways the government can get involved. You can see over here on the left, we have monetary policy, which we'll talk about in another unit. And today, what we're going to spend more time on, fiscal policy, which includes increasing government spending or adjusting taxes. Okay. So as the government adjusts spending and adjusts taxes, those both can impact the way that the economy reacts. Okay. So we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about fiscal policy. The end summation, fiscal policy is specifically actions taken by the government. Monetary policy, usually actions taken by the Federal Reserve, which again, we'll talk about in another unit. Okay. So we're going to focus on that spending and those taxes. With fiscal policy, there's two different types of fiscal policy. There are discretionary fiscal policy and there's non-discretionary fiscal policy. Discretionary, if you know what the word discretionary means, pretty obvious here. This is when Congress is specifically choosing to act. They're getting involved in something as they go. So Congress is going to create some new bill designed to impact aggregate demand. This could be expansionary or contractionary policy. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, they can go ahead and change taxes or change government spending in an effort to hit the gas, improve the economy, or hit the brake, slow that economy down. Unfortunately, the problem, and we're seeing some of this with the COVID-19 bill in Congress right now, they've been discussing this thing for 6+ months. Should we do it? Should we not? Even once they choose to do it, there's going to be a lag between when people get the benefits and when it actually, when it passes Congress and when it actually comes into effect. Okay. So this is why non-discretionary fiscal policy is a good idea. It's also why oftentimes people advocate for monetary policy. Okay. So, and the example there, again, Congress could increase spending. Joe Biden can pass that stimulus package to try and put money in people's pockets. The more money people have, the more money they'll spend, which ultimately leads to an improvement in the economic system. We also have non-discretionary fiscal policy. And these are things that your book talks about that they call automatic stabilizers. These are things that are already in place and they automatically help the economy out. So the best way I can explain this is something like unemployment benefits. So unemployment benefits work where if you were to lose your job, the government goes ahead and covers part of your salary for a period of time while you're unemployed. And so that extra money that they're giving you is helping offset the fact that you lost your job. And you can think about this on a large scale. The government actually automatically, as unemployment rate goes up, they're paying those unemployment benefits automatically, and that will lessen the impact of people losing their jobs, hence automatic stabilizer. Okay, you can think about all of these different things coming in. These different laws are specifically created in a way where they counter the cyclical nature of the economy. So if you think about the other side of unemployment, as people start to get jobs, the government spending on unemployment benefits automatically goes down. As people lose their jobs and they end up on welfare, government spending increases to help those people out. And when those people start making more money and get off welfare, then that government spending comes down. And those things have the impact of ultimately helping the economy stay more balanced. Okay. And that explains that in that bullet point right there. All right. So contractionary fiscal policy is whenever the government is applying the brake. When the government steps in and says, we would like to reduce inflation. We want to decrease GDP. We think the economy is growing too fast. There's two specific ways they can do this. The government can go ahead and decrease government spending, take money out of the economy. They also can go ahead and increase taxes. Either way, By increasing government spending, you're adding money into the economy, you're increasing GDP, or by adding taxes, you're actually taking away people's disposable income, which will reduce spending from individuals. Both of those have the similar impact of shrinking the economy. Okay? You can actually combine the two. There's some problems with that. We'll talk a little bit more. Okay? Expansionary fiscal policy is the opposite of this. It's laws that are going ahead and increasing government spending, laws that are decreasing taxes on consumers. And those things also have the impact of, instead of slowing the economy down, speeding it up. Now, that's the basics of fiscal policy. It's pretty simple. What we start to see when we see problems, though, the actual decision about how much should the government spend, how much should the government raise or lower taxes to help meet the needs of the economy where we go, can be much debated. Okay? So when you see this type of a gap, I'm going to give you a moment. You should be able to identify this particular gap is hope you can identify it. Okay? This would be a recessionary gap. As a recessionary gap, what type of policy should we be using? Again, you should be filling these answers in. If the economy is too small, we want to go ahead and add the gas. That's expansionary fiscal policy. Okay? And expansionary fiscal policy is when the government should, if we're talking about just spending, increase spending. Could also lower taxes, but again, we're going to focus on the spending here. Okay? By increasing spending, they're going to put more money in people's pockets, and they're going to start to increase our aggregate demand, pushing us back towards our long-run aggregate supply. Okay, we want to get towards equilibrium. We need more people to have jobs to go ahead and do that. So we need more spending to get those people their extra jobs. Okay, now specifically, how much should the government spend? Right now, we can see that the real GDP is at $400 billion. Our long-run aggregate supply is at $500 billion. And so you might say, well, it makes sense for the government to spend $100 billion to close that gap, right? We want to go ahead and get there. Now, the reality is that's not true. And that's going to be the subject of the next stuff that we watch, the next video you guys tackle. Sorry, got my next class coming up. What we want to do is we want to focus on, if you remember all the way back to module 16, we talked about the multiplier. And the fact that the government increases spending $100 billion means $100 billion goes into the pocket of Americans. But then those Americans are going to spend that money. And as they spend that money, it's going to put more money in other people's pockets. And so we need to make sure we keep track of the multiplier, which will be the subject of our next video. So thank you very much for listening, paying attention. Hopefully we don't have too many questions, but of course you can come back to class and address those concerns. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. So thank you very much for your attention and have a great day. Thank you, everybody.